You're now listening to Shoot the Sit with Savant and Silky.
So let me ask you this.
Mm-hmm.
With me and you agreeing with PlayStation 2 being the best era of gaming, why wasn't any other eras considered the best era?
Well, like I was saying, the PS1 era, I feel like that was a pretty solid one. Actually, before I answer, I kind of I pulled up the timeline so we can talk about that real quick.
Okay.
Now there's 8 total generations. I'm kind of briefly go over the first few because we weren't around that time and we didn't really rock with those. But we got the Magnavox Odyssey.
Uh-huh.
All right. And then that was 1972. That's where Pong and everything was going crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Second generation was the Atari. That was 1982, so about 10 years out there. And then next generation was some more Ataris.
Atari really was one of those games that really had the gaming community in a chokehold the first go around.
Yeah.
It's probably collecting dust in everybody's shelves now, but
now the Nintendo that came out in 1985, that was the third generation.
That's the one so I remember Nintendo because that's the gray box with the square controllers.
Yep. And then you have the Super Nintendo fourth generation that came out 1991.
That was 2 years before I was born. So remember that controller, that wasn't square. It had more of a body, but it was still a rectangular.
See, the difference, the first Sega, you had to flip the lid open in the front and then put it in. The Super Nintendo was the cartridge you put in on top.
Yeah.
And then we have the fourth generation, Game Boy, 1989. Then we had fifth generation. This was 1995 when the PS1 came out. 1996 when the Nintendo 64 came out. And I feel like that's when gaming really took a drastic turn. Now, I got to give a shout out at the previous generation, fourth generation. This is all fourth generation, but that's when the Game Boy came out. Solid, I feel like the Game Boy, it was a positive direction, but it kind of like the difference between PS1 and PS2 and the Xbox to the Xbox 360. It's like the Game Boy was a great idea, but a lot of people didn't really know what to do with it. And it was kind of like, all right, we're starting off, but it was the Game Boy Color and beyond. I feel like that's when shit really took off.
Yeah, the Game Boy Color and the Game Boy Advance really took things off. It's slick. They were kind of ahead of their times with mobile games, for real.
That's what I'm saying, bro. So that's what I'm like, I gotta give them shout outs because they were definitely pioneers, but kind of like with PlayStation. Like PlayStation, you started off with Crash Bandicoot, just Spyro, Tekken, Final Fantasy, I think was in Game Boy at first.
It was.
But Final Fantasy 7, one of the best Final Fantasies, like that's when shit really started to pop off. But I still feel like the PS2 did it the best. Like it really just refined. Like it's basically when you get like a movie franchise and the first idea, like all right, let me ask you a quick side note. When it comes to the Fast and the Furious, what is the most notable Fast and the Furious sequel?
1, 2, 3.
No, bro. I'm saying like, which one? Is it 2? Is it 3?
For me, it's Tokyo Drift. So 3.
Boom. Exactly. That's exactly what I was looking for. The second one was solid.
Mm-hmm.
It was an improvement on the first one, but it wasn't until Tokyo Drift where like it really took an idea and ran with it, and people loved that shit.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like everybody across the board would say Tokyo Drift. So to that same point, I feel like that's what happened with the PlayStation and the Game Boy and all that good shit.
Yeah.
Then we had the 5th generation. That's when the Virtual Boy came out, 1994. The Game Boy Pocket, which again, they played around with the Game Boy ideas, but wasn't really hitting.
Mm-hmm.
Game Boy Color, 1998.
Okay.
You know, and then the 6th generation, this is where we at. This is where the PS2 came out, 2000. Dreamcast came in 1999. GameCube came out in 2001. Xbox came out in 2001. We were eating on that generation, bro.
Yeah.
That's like all the other generations. I skipped stuff like the Wonder Swan Color and the Neo Geo Pocket. Like I said, 5th generation, we was eating Dreamcast, PlayStation 2, GameCube, Xbox. The 6th generation was the Game Boy Advance in 2001, and it had its own lane, and rightfully so. The Game Boy Advance was a solid. It was solid too. But I just feel like, I mean, really, like, what games did you play on that Game Boy that were not Pokemon?
Hey,
I'm trying to tell you, bro.
Hey,
they was good for what they was good for. You know what I'm saying?
You got one idea and you run with it. Like, look,
I ain't mad at it, bro.
I ain't play anything else but Pokemon on Game Boy. And you know what's crazy, bro? You know what's crazy? I may be thinking about this wrong, but the Game Boy Advance was the first game to play games in a previous version of a game. Meaning, like, you know how now the PS5 and the Xbox
like
Series
backwards
X,
compatibility?
backwards compatibility. Game Boy Advance were the first to do it because you can play Game Boy Color games on the Game Boy Advance.
Oh, see, and that's what I'm saying, bro. Like, honorable mentions because they was doing this shit. They were doing some advanced shit. But what other games?
What other games, bro? Man.
Bro, as a side project, go look that up. See what other hit games came out of the Game Boy Advance.
I'm not gonna say what other hit games came out, but I know I had me about like 4 or 5 games that wasn't Pokemon that I was playing on the Game Boy Color, on the Game Boy Advance. But the moment I got my hands on Pokemon, it was a wrap.
That's what I'm saying, bro. Like, I'm not saying there wasn't no other games, but I'm just saying, like, when you really think about Game Boy and Game Boy Advance, I think maybe people think maybe Pokemon, maybe Kirby.
Yep. So there's a few games that I play, and I'm so weird. So Game Boy Advance, right? There's this game, and you've seen the anime, but it came out in Game Boy Advance, was Inuyasha.
Mm-hmm.
That came out in Game Boy Advance. And then I played Dragon Ball Z Fighters. No, not Z Fighters. Dragon Ball Buu Saga. I played that on Game Boy Advance. So like I played some fighting games on Game Boy Advance. Now I play some shit now. Like I played some games on the Game Boy Advance. It was just
games?
The moment those games that I mentioned, but the moment I got my hands on Pokemon, it was a wrap. Dragon Ball Z Buu Saga.
Are you sure?
Yes.
Okay, no, I'm just saying you struggling.
Yes.
You can say Pokemon hands down, but I
can say because Pokemon was Pokemon, bro. Like,
chokehold.
Yeah. So like Buu Saga. Let me see. Come on. Boo's Fury. That's the name of it.
See,
Boom, Boo's Fury.
that's my fucking point. That's all that matters. That's my point.
Wow.
Because you can remember it barely.
I remember it because I played it and I beat the game.
Which Pokemon did you have on Game Boy Advance?
I had Ruby. I had Emerald. I had Silver.
No hesitation.
I had Silver. I had the one. I had the yellow. I had the yellow Game Boy Color game where you had Pikachu walking around with you. I had that one.
Look at all these details you can come up with. That's my point, bro. You better play them other games, and they was solid. They was some solid games. But yeah, fuck all that. Pokemon
was, hey, bro, I can't even count yet, bro.
Choco,
like, fuck all
bro.
the other games. Yeah, it was it. It still got me the Choco. I got a Pokemon game on my Switch right now. Like,
I'm trying to tell you, bro. Look, again, when talking about the continuations of franchises, well, at one point you just like, man, do something else. But at the same time, you were like, nah, keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. And you know what's crazy about that, right? I remember this specific because me and my sister had a Game Boy Advance. Even though I was playing Pokemon Hard Body, I was playing other games too. I keep saying that because I don't like that point being thrown in my face that, oh yeah, you remember Pokemon mainly. Yeah, I do remember Pokemon mainly, but I did play some other games. But I remember specifically also that this is when Disney and like Cartoon Network and Nickelodeon was starting to drop games on the Game Boy Advance because Kim Possible came out there. Liz McGuire game came out during that time.
Those were hard.
Right. And so like,
I'll give you that.
I just don't remember that, but I will. But still, the fact still remains, Pokemon was.
See, I'll even pick it back and say that's how I feel about the Sega Genesis. I feel like I can remember playing like a Lion King game. Yeah, I remember playing like some Power Ranger games on it, and those are some solid games. But can I remember the names of them? Nope. Can I remember what they look like? Nah. I just remember, hey, they was bops like commercial properties, IPs. They was solid. But moving on back to this timeline, the sixth generation was the Xbox 360, the PS3, and the Wii. Now, I'm gonna say the 360 and the Wii really had this. The PS3 was definitely a solid contender in it, but that's when I feel like some of that capitalistic monetary gain started to kind of kick in for PlayStation because the PS3 was no longer backwards compatible to PS2 games. You gotta pay PS1 games on it. And only certain consoles. And I feel like 360 is when, Halo was really taking off even more.
Halo Infinite.
I feel like that's when sports games were really kicking off. Like the PlayStation has some solid sports games, but I remember playing like Fight Night and boxing games and shit on the Xbox. I don't really remember playing it on the PlayStation.
I played Fight Night on PlayStation 2. No, you know what? You're right. I played Fight Night on my brother's Xbox 360, so it was 360. Yeah.
They came out with some solid, like I think hockey. I was playing on that, and again, not saying that these games didn't come out on the PlayStation, but I just felt like those games were, I don't know, they just felt better played with sports games or whatever.